민주평화통일자문회의 아시아태평양지역회의와 퀸슬랜드 주립대학 한국학연구소의 공동 온라인 학술 세미나 시리즈가 최근 모두 마무리됐습니다. 마지막 4차 웨비나에는 호주와 한국의 대표적인 석학 게러스 에반스 교수와 문정인 교수가 참여해 한반도 평화에 대한 호주와 미들파워 국가들의 역할에 대해 논의했습니다. 이날 최종 세미나는 퀸슬랜드 대학 인문학부 학과장 헤더 즈위커 교수의 개회사, 민주평통 아태지역회의 이숙진 부의장과 홍상우 주 시드니 총영사의 인사말과 함께 시작됐고, 퀸슬랜드 대학의 팀던 부총장이 기조연설과 함께 세미나를 직접 주재했습니다.
Australia-Korea relations, although they're very strong, have really never quite reached their full potential, and it's absolutely time that they did. Economically, in people-to-people, social and cultural terms, despite the best efforts of UQ, universities, but above all in political and security terms. Given the very present fraught and fragile character of so much of the regional environment, how effective middle powers can be in making a difference depends on a number of factors: resources, creativity, credibility, opportunity in particular. By resources, I mean the need for a reasonably wide network of diplomatic posts and officials with energy and stamina. By creativity, I mean this: what middle powers lack in economic, political, or military clout, they can often make up for with quick diplomatic footwork. Evident in the Asian region, again, in the creation of new security and economic architecture that we've seen in recent decades: APEC, ARF, EAS, and again, the Cambodia peace plan, I guess. Credibility is important, the need to avoid hypocrisy by practicing at home what they preach abroad, not least on human rights and democracy issues. And here it has to be said that within MICTA, Turkey is now particularly vulnerable in this respect. Allies of great powers like Australia also have a little bit of a credibility problem. We have to be perceived as having some real independence, not just acting as a cipher or stalking force for a great protector if we are to have any influence. And finally, opportunity matters. While there have been many past examples in our region of effective middle power diplomacy, we do have to recognise that in an Asian setting, where great or major power rivalry, above all now between China and the US, but also Japan and China, China and India, India and Pakistan, does provide so much of the context and dynamics. Here, the scope for middle powers to be really influential on the really big piece of security issues may be limited. That said, while recognising the reality of limited opportunity, let me finally offer nonetheless 3 examples which the middle powers of this region, very much including us, Australia and Korea, are both capable of being leading players in this respect, and in where, in my judgment, we could have a significant impact. The first of those 3 issues is setting the agenda for the East Asian Summit, which, although its potential as a regional cooperation organisation has so far not been fully realised, it does have all the ingredients, in my view, to become the preeminent regional dialogue and policy-making body, containing, as the EAS now does, all the major regional players, including now the United States and Russia, meeting at leader level and mandated to address both economic and political issues. Its 18 members include a majority, in fact, middle powers. Most of the ASEANs, Australia and Korea, New Zealand also can be characterised in this respect, at least because of its tradition of multilateral activism. The second thing I think we can be doing as middle powers in this region, Australia and Korea in particular, is helping to really visibly push back against excessive Chinese assertiveness and overreach, including in the South China Sea. While China manifestly doesn't want to provoke violent conflict anywhere, it is clearly intent on recreating as much of the historic hegemonic tributary relationships with its southern and perhaps eastern neighbours as well that it can get away with. And a united front of middle powers might, in my judgment, be more effective actually in resisting this than relying so much now on the United States that is, among other things, still very reluctant to stop asserting not just its presence, but its primacy. There's been much talk of the Quad in this context: India, Australia, Japan, and the United States, showing a united front diplomatically and to some extent militarily with joint exercises and the like. and I don't oppose continuing to cautiously develop that cooperation. But I am rather more attracted in this context to developing a united front grouping which would harness the collective middle power, energy and capacity of a larger number of regional states, of real regional substance, not all of them necessarily democracies, in which, for example, India, Australia and Japan would be joined by Korea, by Indonesia and Vietnam. And finally, some of us are in a position, I think, to influence the global nuclear weapons elimination debate and should do more than we have in this respect. Had Australia and Korea, along with our larger neighbour Japan, been willing to support President Obama's move towards a no first use commitment, the world might have taken a significant step toward reducing the salience and legitimacy of the most indiscriminately inhumane and existentially threatening weapons ever invented. The support of the Central and European NATO allies would probably also have been necessary in that respect, but the East Asians were crucial. Well, finally, raw economic and political power will always count for a lot in international affairs, but it doesn't count for everything. Middle powers with a sense of where we want to go and with the credibility, the resources and the energy to follow through can have a major impact in making this region and the wider world safer and saner. That's the challenge, as I see it, for both Korea and Australia. And I believe that by working ever more closely together to strengthen the many bonds that we already share, we can in fact deliver on that. Thank you.
South Korean president has been pushing for the replacement of that existing armistice agreement with that permanent peace agreement. What do you think about it?
Well, I think it's overdue for that kind of big step forward to be made. It would be courageous, I guess, for South Koreans and the Americans to put that on the table without extracting some whopping great big reciprocal concession from the North Koreans. But I really do think, it sounds soft, but I think we've got to be in the business of rebuilding trust and confidence. And there just hasn't been a willingness in the past to really do the kind of things that really are important to the North Koreans. And above all, they're anxious about regime survival. Above all, they're anxious about potential military threats. And if we in the South and in the West and with America can take some really serious steps to assuage that concern, then I think the game really could change. Now, I don't want to be very precise about armistice versus full treaty and this step versus that step, but I do think the instinct that I know Chung-in shares, and I know President Moon-jae-in shares, and the present South Korean government shares, to get some serious concessions on the table, or some gestures on the table, some confidence building measures on the table from our side, and not just wait for stuff to happen on the other side, is the way forward. I know there's plenty of voices in Korea that Chung-in has to deal with all the time that are deeply, deeply opposed to making any concession of any kind until you get almost a full denuclearization package in front of you. But I remember going back to the Keto period that we really weren't very good in meeting our own obligations, and in terms of supplying fuel oil and opening up the diplomatic relations that were promised, and a whole variety of small steps. There was a lot of foot dragging on the American, on the Western, on the Allied side, and under those circumstances, we did just over time sacrifice the trust as such a crucial ingredient in any kind of serious negotiation.
Status quo approach or muddling through approach. Grand majority of Koreans, South Koreans support that idea. That means what? Security with the United States, economy with China. We should be able to muddle through conflicting points of US-China rivalry, okay? By pursuing strategic ambiguity or by pursuing, double hedging in a strategy. But this approach worked during the days of President Kim Dae-jung. But at the time, Jiang Zemin and Clinton were in good terms. And President Kim Dae-jung was in very good terms with President Jiang Zemin and President Clinton. But when the China-US relations get worsened, this kind of opportunistic posture may not work. Then finally, I personally argue that we need to pursue some kind of transcending strategy, which is similar to what Professor Garrett Evans suggested. That is what? We are trapped in the bloc diplomacy. We should find out to overcome this bloc diplomacy. Otherwise, we'll be fall prey to balance of power determinism. We should get out of it. And how can we do that? We should pursue multilateralism on global affairs. And we should pursue open regionalism for integration and cooperation. Okay. And by doing what? By coming with new ideas, new knowledges, by developing new norms, principles, rules, procedures. In other words, creating some form of international and regional regimes. Of course, in doing that, we should consolidate our alliance with the United States. Why? Because in South Korea alone cannot pursue this multilateralism and open regionalism. We should cooperate with someone else. With whom? Australia, Japan, Canada, and even extending to Europe, Great Britain, France, Germany, which in a cabin word called so-called M7 or M11, multilateral 7 or multilateral 11. Okay, we may be including multilateral 11, M11. And I think that is the only way we can assure our survival, peace, and prosperity. Then here comes the imperative for Australian South Korean cooperation. As Professor Garrett Evans pointed out, we need a more creative middle power diplomacy. And South Korea and Australia should sit together and come up with joint ideas on how to avoid this US-China new Cold War rivalry. What role should the middle powers play? And I think that should be the most important one, okay? And if American allies, such as South Korea, Australia, Japan, Canada, work together, in New Zealand, work together and come up with an idea, because we are dependent on China too, okay? We are American allies, but we have been strategic partners with China. If we can come up with a collective voice, I think that we can influence Washington and Beijing so that we can, make in such a way that these big superpowers avoid the, game of chicken, okay? And in the sense that then Australia and South Korea work very closely, and even we should develop, that kinds of agenda. And I don't know current government in Australia, but when Garrett was serving as a foreign affairs minister, and he did, particularly on R2P, right to protect, all this multilateral agenda setting. Australia did it, South Korea supported it, okay? And as he pointed out, APEC is another good example. In other words, South Korea, if South Korea and South Korea work together, we can come up with a new, innovative and imaginative ideas to foster multilateralism and open regionalism so that we can avoid being trapped in the superpower rivalry between Washington and Beijing in the form of new Cold War. Thank you.